My name is Kyle Royer.
Oh, it's hot. It's really hot.
And I'm making my second ever sword named Excelsior.
It's even more steel than I used on my first sword.
So let's embark together on this epic edged adventure.
In this video, we're gonna do some fun cutting and slicing with Excelsior. We're also gonna jump right in and start doing embellishments on the handle and fittings. Before we do any fun slicing or cutting, we need to set the handle in epoxy first. We need to do that in order to get a perfect glove-tight fit between the handle material and the tang. It fits pretty good now, but we want it perfect so any shock from the sword cutting and slicing gets absorbed by the entire handle instead of just hitting hot spots throughout the inside of the handle. I got the handle bedded in epoxy so it fits onto the tang like a perfect glove fit. I do have a word of caution though. I had an extremely hard time getting this handle off. Normally I'd take the handle off after 4 hours and the epoxy is still ever so slightly pliable. I use super high quality West System epoxy. This time though, I kind of forgot about it and it was on there about 6 hours and it made all the difference in the world. I had an extremely hard time getting this thing off there. I was pounding on the end of the tang with a 2-pound sledgehammer. It finally broke free though. Everything's good. The handle's still intact. We're ready to move on and get this thing fluted up. It's time to get the layout on the handle for Excelsior. We're doing straight fluting on this, which is different than any of the fluting I've ever done. All of my previous fluting was spiral flutes, where the flutes go all the way around the handle, at least one revolution going down the length of the handle. But for this, I want nice straight flutes, and I've actually had to go through quite a bit of trial and error in order to get a good way to lay out this. I actually have a course on doing handle fluting in the spiral method, and that works great every time, where you use a wheel like this that has 8 little lines on it. You just line it up here and you mount it up in a little jig, and then you can draw a line, turn, draw a line, turn, draw a line. That works great for your regular spiral fluting. It's not working great though for this style of fluting, because if you look at this circle I've got right here, one end of our handle is an oval, the other end is a circle. So when you have an oval, these lines over here are really far apart, and then these lines are close together. And that normally looks really good on a spiral flute. The effect that it gives on a spiral handle is it'll make these flutes tighter together, and then these will be a little bit further together. But with straight flutes, I did the layout and it looks really bad. These being just straight and tight together, and then these being far apart looked really bad. So I need to get those really even. So in order to do that, I've got 16 lines around the small end of the handle that's round, evenly spaced. And then I also drew 16 lines around the oval end of the handle. I need to connect these lines and they'll gently curve. So in order to get that curve, I'm gonna use tape, kind of similar to the way guys do on body work on vehicles. I'm gonna put tape on there and then go along the tape with my pencil and get a line. And then if those lines look good, I'll go over them lightly with a Sharpie, and then we'll have good lines to follow as we file. In order to get the 16 lines on the round end of the handle, I just use the traditional method that I normally use with the round wheel, just one that has 16 lines on it. And then for the oval end, I just put 4 lines that go around all 4 sides of the handle. And then I use this pair of dividers with a pencil on it, and I got it set to just the right size. And I was able to come in here, draw a line, go to the next spot, draw a line, and get nice even spacing all around. Let's go connect these up and then we can start filing our flutes in.
Don't sing. Smile. No.
That was my favorite part of the whole video.
Sure it was.
And everybody else's too, they'll love that too. Because they're not gonna be expecting it, all of a sudden they're gonna be
I don't know about you guys, but I need a break from all this filing and hand sanding and fluting. I think it's time to go slice a couple pumpkins and maybe have a stab at a soda bottle. That pumpkin cutting was pretty terrifying. On one of those cuts, I think I had the blade tipped on a little bit of an angle and it caught onto the pumpkin and kind of drew the sword blade up as I was kind of going down. And if you look back at the video and slow it down super slow, frame by frame, you can see that blade like flexing like this, like serpentine. It was going up and down at the same time. That was terrifying to see. I could feel it too. After I made that cut, I could feel the blade was like doing some wobbly stuff and I was like terrified at first. I'm like, I don't want to look, it's part of the blade broken off. But it did its job, it stayed there. The blade is basically tempered like a spring, so it's technically made to move quite a bit and it's pretty thin. All the fluting is done on the handle. That took so much time. There's 16 flutes and this handle's 5.5 inches long. So there were so many flutes to clean up and everything on this handle. It definitely fought me quite a bit. At first, I had all the flutes a little too flat and I wasn't real happy with it. So after I'd already spent like a day hand sanding, I went back and filed them in deeper to get them more domed. And it just took a long time. It's done now. There's only one more thing we have to do before this handle is completely finished, and that's to bevel the ends. I've already done one end here and I've masked off the end so we can clamp it in the vise, and I'm gonna show you the process of doing this other end. We wanna bevel the ends so it'll leave a really nice transition from the fluted handle to the fittings. Without the bevels, it can just look kind of straight and harsh. We're gonna mark a line on the end of the handle so we know how far to file to. Get the file out one more time and start filing away until we get to that line and sand it to coffee break. We're gonna sand it to 1500 grit and then lightly buff. Got it clamped up in the vise with a bunch of layers of tape around the handle to protect it, and also a layer of leather. So we don't want to damage the finished flutes at this stage. We've got our line on the end of the handle. Just gonna take a file and start making the bevel. I'm gonna go for approximately a 45. It may be plus or minus depending on how it's looking. I'm just gonna go by the feel and look of it as I go. I'm gonna go straight from the file finish to a 320 grit sandpaper, and then I'll do 600 and 1500, and then we can go buff. The handle is finished. It is now the most completed part of the entire sword. We're ready to move on to doing the gold inlay on the fittings. To start out with, for the front spacer, we need to get a good layout for the very center of the front spacer and then the center going this direction as well, so I can get my name centered up on there really well. And I think what I'm gonna try to do is electrochemically etch my maker's mark in there, and then I'll take it into the engraving room and deepen that and then put the gold in there. I think that'll be quicker than manually laying out each letter by hand. I've already got a stencil made up and ready to go with nice large letters that we can inlay gold into. One for one side that says Royer and then one for the other with MS on it. I'm trying to get a center line on the front spacer, and I know that the blade is symmetrical all the way down, and I know that both tips of the guard are perfectly centered with the blade. So I'm holding this square right here to set it all up nice and square to my workbench. And then I'm using the height gauge to scribe a little line right in the middle. And while I'm here, I'll make some lines further apart. It'll give me a good reference as well. I'm getting ready to electrochemically etch my maker's mark in. I've got the stencil all laid out, but I'm very doubtful that it's even gonna work at all because I'm on a multi-curved surface. Not only does the part curve around, but it also curves down as well. And because of that, I had to really stretch the stencil on top. And yet, even with that, it's still all got extra slack on the bottom. So I'm pretty sure that it might not work. Got a bad feeling about this. Oh, please be good. Please be good. It's gonna look like just a big blotch of mud on the wall. Oh, it worked. Oh, it actually worked. It looks pretty good. Oh, I can work with that. I can work with that. Oh, it worked. Oh, I'm so glad that worked. Oh man, what a mess. Yeah, the Sharpie definitely inhibits the etch sometimes. We've got my maker's mark etched in, MS on one side, Royer on the other. Got a really good outline to go by, mostly good. There's a couple places where it was really faint because I was going around a curve and kind of had a hard time etching it in, but it's good enough. We're gonna go in now with the engraving chisel and the high-speed dental burr and slowly deepen it so we can inlay gold. It needs to be nice and deep so we can put some dovetails on the side so when we hammer the gold in there, it'll get locked in place. So I'm gonna carefully start going through the outline and deepening everything out. Maybe I should do a practice before I start doing this. I haven't engraved in a while. Is it sharp? Nope. I thought my chisel was nice and sharp, but it's actually pretty dull, so I need to get it sharpened up before I can start cutting. I got a brand new GRS sharpening jig, which is really sweet. Haven't really used it yet. Here's my old one here. It's really old and not super accurate anymore because it's come apart a couple times and I put it back together and something's a little off in it. So I got a brand new one and it is pretty heavy duty and sweet looking. So we're gonna try it out on here. Do the heavy removal with a 180 grit wheel and then clean it up with a 1200 grit wheel. Maybe get rid of the burr with a little bit of leather. That takes care of the face. Now I need to do the heel. Imagine a woodworking chisel where you have that angle on one side of it and it's flat on the other. This is kind of similar. The heel is going to be this little tiny angle that allows us to control the depth of cut. Without the heel, it would just want to dig straight into your metal and never stop until it reached the other side. On my flat gravers, I like to do a rounded heel and not just have one straight angle. So that's why I was slowly changing the angle as I went down. We're just ever so slightly, barely touching it, not removing much at all. Clean it up on the leather a little bit. The leather will make it a little bit more dull because it'll kind of round over the edge ever so slightly, but it also makes it a little stronger because it's kind of like convexing the edge just a little bit. So it makes it a little more durable, a little less sharp. Also polishes it up real nicely. I've got some buffing compound and diamond paste and stuff like that embedded in the leather wheel. That should be good. I've cut in the 2 lines of gold that go all the way around the front spacer. We're gonna have really nice wide gold inlays, and I've also already dovetailed it, and I came in and made some little nicks at a little bit of an angle coming in from each direction to help lock the gold in place. The next thing we need to do is to dovetail my name. And the reason we dovetail is to hold the gold in. You can kind of imagine it like a dovetailed wood joint. Instead of just having a groove, we're actually gonna have the groove widen at the bottom, so when you hammer the gold in there, it'll fill in the groove and it'll lock it in place. So I do that with this little spade-shaped cutter, and I come in from the sides at like a 40-45 degree angle and actually make the bottom of the groove wider than the top. gonna do that around all the edges of the grooves. Got a couple different little spade-shaped cutters for dovetailing that I like to use to kind of get in around the different radiuses and get all the way up against the edges and everything. So I'll use a couple different ones. We're not so much cutting as we are just kind of squishing the metal out. There's the main cuts for the R. I'm gonna come in here and clean up some of these a little bit. That chisel I was using was really rounded on the end, so it's kind of hard to get all the way in the corners with it. So I've got a more precise one here that I can clean the corners up with a little bit. The reason I'm even worried about the corners is because the metal kind of squishes out and widens it ever so slightly. So if I don't come in here and pay attention to the corners as well, the corners might be kind of a little bit more narrow than the rest of the groove, since the rest of it kind of got squished out. So as far as holding the gold in place, just getting close to the corners with that first cutter would have been more than enough to really lock the gold in place. So this is just more for widening the groove, really. And it's subtle, it's a subtle amount, but it's makes a little bit of a difference. For the smaller diameter gold, I don't need to make those cuts at the bottom that go in both directions, like what you see going around the big bands. That's just for the really wide gold, because it's a little bit trickier to hold that in place since there's so much surface area to the gold compared to how much surface area you have locking in at the edges. So these little bits don't need the little kind of checkered pattern I have going on at the bottom. That does it for the R. I'm just gonna move through here and systematically knock these letters out one at a time. I've got the MS on the other side done. We're gonna go OYER next. All the dovetails are cut in. It's now time to take our 24 karat gold and start smashing it into the grooves. So I've got my pneumatic handpiece with just a little piece of brass rod on the end of it. And the brass should not hurt the front spacer or mess up, make any deep dings or anything. It's kind of got a little bit of give to it. slowly working it around this M. And I could either cut off the pieces and do a new piece for each little line, or you can kind of bend it around the corner if there's enough room there to do it. And there's enough room on this M, so I'm just bending it around the corner. This gold might be a little thin for some of these lines, and the other thickness I have is a little thick. I need to get a draw plate so I can basically make whatever size I need. This should work all right. I know that this bottom part of the M is a little bit wider, so because of that, I'm going to cut this gold extra long, and then we'll kind of squish it up a little bit, and that'll give us more gold to fill out this wide area. It's extremely soft. 24 karat gold is very nice to work with. I've also annealed it right before inlaying. Just heat it up until it's like glowing just a little bit with a small torch, or even a lighter if it's small diameter gold. Just heat it up until it's glowing, and then let it air cool, which for this wire only takes a couple seconds. Now we can go over the entire area and really hammer it in, because it's not hammered in very hard yet. It's just kind of set in place for now. We'll have a little excess every once in a while. That section I started with was extra thick, and so we've got a little extra gold there. I'm not even going to try to save it because my time is worth more than this little tiny flakes of gold that I have here. So I'm just going to smash the tar out of it now and make sure the gold's hammered in really well, and that it fills in all the dovetails. I'm gonna peel back some of these little flakes that are hanging over just a little bit. Maybe kind of break them off. So I don't want those flakes hanging over onto this other area and kind of smashing that gold in. And then that flake breaking off later when I sand on it, and that would just leave like a little low spot in the other gold. So we don't want the flakes hanging over. Break that off, and then I can smooth it up with the brass. And there's one letter. Once we sand all that down to the surface, it'll be nice and pretty. Sometimes things have to get really ugly though before they start to become beautiful, and right now it just looks like a big blotch of gold flaking off all over the place. I use the torch to make a little ball on the end of the gold, and that gives me a little bit of extra gold to work with right where I start. I like to do that because sometimes where you start, you can run out of gold right there a little bit, just because the gold kind of squishes out of the way of your brass rod that's hammering it in. So that little ball just gives a little extra to work with. I'm running into a little issue with the 24 karat gold. Mostly when I go to burn a little ball or melt a ball on the end of the wire, it seems like the ball is getting really porous and kind of covered in oxide, and normally that doesn't happen. So I'll show you real quick what's going on, and then we can kind of compare it to a piece of gold that melts the way I expect it to. It's kind of making me question if there's something wrong with the gold or something. So I'll melt the end of it. And it kind of is really reluctant to form a nice ball. And then you can see how the ball is really black, and if you looked at it under the microscope, it's kind of porous and has little holes and stuff in it. And it should just be staying super shiny and be like super shiny gold colored. So here's another piece of 24 karat gold. This one's a little larger diameter, and I'll show you what I normally would expect that little ball on the end to look like. So melt a little bit on the end there. and it's staying a really nice bright gold color instead of turning black. So I called Rio Grande Jewelry Supply, which is where I get the gold, and I've probably purchased at least $10,000 worth of gold from them over the last couple of years. So they said there's two different things I could try, and one is to sand the surface of the gold with some 1000 grit paper, because there might be some artifacts of other metals or something left over on the surface of the gold from the milling process, and then to wash it off and then try melting the end again. And if that doesn't work, to just send the gold into them, and they could run a test on it to make sure that it's 24 karat. It's not really inhibiting me from inlaying the gold. The gold still seems super soft, like it's 24 karat. It doesn't seem like it's 22 or 18, because it would be a lot harder to inlay if it were. We'll take this piece out and sand on it with some 1000 grit and then wash it off really well and see if it melts the way I would expect it to on the end. Surface is sanded, and I also washed it off in some soap water. And now we can see if we can melt that little ball and get a really nice, clean, shiny little melted ball at the end of the wire. I think it's clean. It's a little bit hard to see with my naked eye, but I'm gonna take a look under the microscope. It sure melted a lot easier. It formed a really nice ball, and earlier I was just having a really difficult time getting the ball to form. And a couple times I couldn't even get it to form. It was just kind of making this nasty looking thing. So come over here to the other end. This is the other end I haven't cleaned. See, I'm getting it really hot, and it's not like that ball was already on there that I melted. But it's like not wanting to make that beautiful little ball. And it looks real dark. This one's still looking a little bit dark, but at least it formed a nice looking ball. So I'll look under the microscope and see if it looks porous or not. So here's the piece we ran the test on after lightly sanding it, and it's still got a real coppery kind of color of scale or oxidation on it. So broke off a little, I don't know, 2.5, 3 inch piece, and then tried it again after sanding on it a little bit more, and I got a beautiful little ball that's super shiny, no oxidation or anything on it. So I think Rio Grande was right. I think there was just some kind of artifacts or something left over on the surface of the gold from the milling process, which won't affect the inlaying at all. I just wanted to make sure that we still had 24 karat gold, and I'm 100% confident that it is now because it's soft and we got back to really nice looking gold. The people at Rio Grande were also very, very helpful in making sure that I got everything figured out. So I think we're good to go. We can go ahead and use this stuff. I've got it sanded off nice and clean, and we should be ready to keep inlaying the maker's mark. start out with, I'm sanding the gold down in the bottom of this groove, and since it's all rounded down there, I have to wrap the sandpaper around something round as well. So I'm just using this file with a bunch of layers wrapped around it. I am noticing something along the edges of the gold inlay. There's a little tiny groove in some places where I think the brass, even though it's soft, still left a little bit of a ding on the edges of the metal since it's all rounded down there. So I have to make sure I sand down enough to get rid of that little ding that's on the edges from the brass rod. Have to be careful not to sand away too much though, because we don't want to sand through the gold and end up exposing all those little teeth that are locking the gold in. That would look really bad. After this is blued, there'd be little black lines showing up on the surface of the gold. That would not be good. The gold inlay is finished on the front spacer. It looks really good. I'm super happy, especially with how the name came out, because I'm always a little worried about that because there's all those little tiny pieces to inlay and it can be a little difficult, but I think it looks super good. For now, I'm gonna leave it at 320 grit and then we'll sand all the rest of the fittings when all the gold inlay is done up to higher and higher grits. I'm gonna probably take all these fittings in the end up to like 5,000 grit, and then we'll put a mirror finish on them on the buffer, and then we'll do my black mirror darkening after that's all done. In the next video, I'm gonna start inlaying the gold in the guard. There's so much gold to put in here, and then it's gonna be finally time to finish hand sanding and etching this blade so we can see how the finished pattern looks on it. I will see you in the next video. May the forge be with you. Bye-bye!